Hello, everybody. My name is Dean of the InkGuild, and welcome back to another episode of Shorthand. Today, we're going to be looking back at episode 9, where Gabe, Alex, and I talk about our world building. So this one goes briefly into, our respective worlds, particularly with one specific fantasy story. So for mine, it's looking at my fantasy series Xeno. For Gabe, it's looking at his overall series called the Night Reaver Saga. And for Alex, it's looking at Katariana, which is the setting for a lot of her fantasy stories. So give a like if you enjoyed it. Our social media is down in the description below, as well as, for the Ink Guild and for us individually. And with all that being said, let's get into the highlights. So, my book, Xeno, is set in the world of Vuhyn, which is Vuhyn. It is its own planet, consisted of 8 lands, 3 major oceans. There's Illyria, which is where the first book is set. Him, which I have talked about in the episode when we were talking about ROCs. Aatrox, Zur, Chaos, Fora, Inkondo, and Belua. Illyria started kind of as a super blank slate, minus the name, because Illyria has been in a lot of things. It's been in a lot of literature, but I wanted to keep that and honor a lot of Shakespeare for Illyria. So it's not just the name of the country. It's also of the continent. It's also the 5 countries within it. So there is Orsino, where Porter was born in, Amari, which is where the story kind of begins, Viola, Belch, and Bastion. Or Orsinians speak with kind of an English accent, and kind of varies between the regions. So people from the south speak more like, or have more of a Birmingham accent or something. I haven't really thought that far into it yet. People in Amari, they have more of a Welsh kind of dialect. People in Viola, they have almost always spoken in a French accent. Belchers speak with a German accent, and Bastions speak with a Irish accent. I've tried to make sure each of the 5 countries had their own kind of signature. Amari is known as being a country full of decadent food, really good pastries, some of the best cooking in all of Illyria. Orsino, it's a very technology heavy country. They focus a lot more on androids, automatic cars, which I haven't really written into the story yet because I need to implement the differences between science fiction and fantasy a little bit better. But with Viola, it's a lot of grace. There's a lot of beauty to the land, some of the most beautiful landscapes you'll find in Viola, as well as a lot of balls, galas, masquerade balls. And then as for Bastion and Belch, I haven't really put in too much work into it yet. So it's a weird thing. It's weird that I don't have much to talk about when it comes to everything else. Each of the other 7 continents aside from Illyria, I haven't touched on too much yet. I know where they are because I've drawn a map of the globe. I've drawn what each continent kind of looks like, but the only real specifics and the only real things that I can definitively share right now is that Zur and Chaos are one land, or they share the same land, but Chaos is significantly smaller than Zur. Fora is scattered between different islands, and it's right near the equator, so it's almost always perfect temperature. Illyria is one of the more northern continents. Him is dead set right at the equator. In terms of races, there are, I guess there's the standard 8 of them right now. So there's the Illyrians, the Hymnics, Zurans, Chaotix, Atroxians, Incondos? I haven't come up with a proper race name for Incondo yet, but I'm still working on that. Beluans and Phorix. The Illyrians could be technically classified as humans. Hymnics are wood elves. I guess by technicality they are wood elves, but I'm trying to work in, as I've said last episode, where I'm trying to work in a lot more of traditional pre-colonization Filipino ancestry and heritage and tradition into that. Zur and the Zurans started off as high elves. Chaos and Chaotix, they started off as dark elves. Phorix and the land of Phora, they are nymphs. And I think I need to do a little bit more research when it comes to that, actually, because I don't know a lot about nymphs. I know that there are different kinds of nymphs, like wood nymphs, water nymphs. Atrox and the Atroxians are orcs, but instead of using goblins as kind of like a reference, I'm trying to use dragons. So I was thinking of entertaining like canines, maybe wingspans. Everyone is obviously they're still kind of orc-ish, so they're very brutish, very traditional, but very warrior heavy race. But I want to incorporate more dragon motifs, make it more interesting. Within Kondo, they are natural fire, firebenders, so they're naturally good at manipulating fire. Haven't really much worked on there, but I think those are the races that I have least developed. The races that I have developed the most are the Illyrians, Zurans, Chaotix, and the Hymnics. The Illyrians are very adept at technology because this world is set in our time, but with a few more advanced changes. And a lot of that is due to the Illyrians having a lot more they're a lot more tenacious when it comes to their technology. They have self-driving cars, security cameras, cell phones, Bluetooth devices, even though they're not called Bluetooth. Hymnics, I've already said that I want to incorporate a lot of, traditional Filipino or traditional Philippine motifs, honoring the Philippines before it was pre-colonized. And I guess, how is it that the descendants of Aboriginals from Philippines, how have they kind of maintained that culture? Chaotix started off as dark elves, but I've since tried to make them a little bit more unique. So when it comes to the kind of elf structure, you have the pointy ears and whatever, but with with the Chaotix, I've eliminated ears in general and I've replaced it with bone kind of going along the forehead. And that's how they think, it's some kind of, they listen through vibrations. With the Zurans, though, that's where it's most interesting to me, because Zur is a huge land, or at least how I've drafted it in early maps. So, and how I've organized it is I've split up the giant land into 4 separate subcontinents. Each one has their own specialties. Each one has their own army of silos, which I've talked about in a previous episode. And something that I really, really want to get properly done before I even get to that book where I debut Zur is artificial life. Well, I don't want to get into that territory yet because I don't want to kind of put that out there so far before I even, I don't want my mouth to speak before my brain does, but I think that's it. So I'll pass it over to Gabe.
For my fantasy, it's called Ildri. It's spelled YLLDRIX. 16 countries across 4 continents and 3 oceans between them. There's the northern continent, but there's a western, there's the southern, and then there's a southeast continent. The first one I'm going to talk about, though, is the North Continent, because that's where most of the books take place. The countries in there are Argentus, Obsidia, Titania, Sea Mason, Diabel, Songwood, and Cavendale. Southeast is it's a very small continent. It's just made up of the country Glassiver. The southern continent is made up of Ryko and Wander. And the western continent is split between Lancaster, New Haven, Arclight, and Venora. So my races are admittedly a little bare bones. I took a lot of inspiration, I think, in how I went about this world from Game of Thrones, where I had less of a lean on races and more of a lean on like how these countries are. So my races are pretty basic. You got your standard orcs, you got your elves, you have your humans, and there's a race called the Mystics, who are essentially mages. They're classified as a different race. How the world in Guildry works is that most people are proficient in some form of magic or another, but most people can only do one magic. They only have one certain ability that they can do. Mystics are a race of people who are proficient in several abilities or are extremely proficient in their specific art, in their specific gift, I guess you could say. And you have demons. I'm using demons very loosely here. They're not like creatures from hell. They're not succubi. It's basically a jack of all words.
Yeah, it's just a term that you're using right now, but you'll eventually either
I'll come up with something better later. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And the last two are are vampires and reavers, which is sort of the last one being what the series is named after. Vampires are very not like how I guess vampires are expect. They control basically one of the countries I mentioned earlier was Titania, and vampires around the world of Ildry, that's sort of known as the Vampire Nation. It's a country that's essentially entirely controlled and operated by vampires. It's very northmost country, so it's basically the only way to live a full lifespan up there is to be impervious to freezing cold temperatures and to become a vampire. You'd have to sacrifice your ability to use any form of magic to become a vampire, but it's a small sacrifice for not freezing to death.
Yeah, I mean, you go out one way, you go out the other. Just one's a little bit worse.
I think a lot of my process involves coming up with it. It either starts out with I'll start with a real word, and then I'll turn it into gibberish, and then I'll just try to amalgamate that gibberish into something that sounds like a reasonable word. Mm-hmm. I remember Ildry started out. That whole word has gone through a transformation through my writing of this, because it started out as a character's name, and then eventually I changed it to a country's name, and then I swapped it out to make it the world's name, because I was like, that just sounds. I guess it just sounds cooler as a world name than a country name. Lancaster as a country is pretty like Western, I guess you could call it. They're sort of a facsimile of like America and Britain as one country. And Lancaster is a name of a German airplane. So I was like, hey, if I want to make these guys, I figured like it'd be a good way to sort of illustrate the militaristic nature of this country, associate it with something real. Argent is the Latin term for silver, and Argentus as a country is sort of like a middle ground. I guess you could call it a middle ground between a lot of these countries that have like tight tensions between them, and Argentus is sort of a peace-giving place. It's a place where people can just. It's sort of a lawless town, but at the same time, it's the only place where the war doesn't exist. Lancaster and Titania have been essentially at a standstill in a long-standing war for the last century before the book starts. So Argentus is sort of a place. It's sort of like Switzerland. It's a place outside of this big conflict between what are essentially vampires and humans warring across the world. They're a very guarded race. Most of the book series is set in a very like cyberpunk sort of modern day world. But Songwood is sort of the one place that hasn't. They're sort of like the Amish. They just haven't. They've stayed away from a lot of modern technology. Anytime a character goes to Songwood, they'll see characters like riding around on horses. We like elves. Elves are already pretty standardly like a secretive and guarded species. So I thought that would be a natural extension of them into a modern day, that they wouldn't really accept a lot of technological advances. They would sort of stick to their own ways and stick to their own means.
I mean, the comparison to the Amish is funny, but I think it works. Like, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think those are the most prominent ones. The rest of them are sort of players. There's a lot of political stuff and a lot of like rising tensions. So a lot of these are more players on the field than really active participants.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the stories are set between Lancaster, Argentus, Titania, Songwood. Well, it's interesting because this didn't start the way this started. I think I mentioned this before. This started out as sort of like a Hellboy thing, where it was set in the real world, but then all of this was going on as like sort of in an underground way.
Yeah.
And then I think at a certain point, that was something that I was into in high school, and then I think when I graduated, I sort of stopped being like I still like Hellboy and I still do like urban fantasy, but so I'm not knocking that. I just think that wasn't something that I wanted to do with this story. So I sort of started developing like what if these races had some of their same principles, but on a more global political scale, and they weren't set on Earth. It was set on this completely new world.
I guess, Gabe, is there anything anything else kind of cool you wanted to share about your world, or? Do you want to just get to the main event?
The main. I guess I could talk. Nah, let's get to the main event.
All right. So.
Don't diminish your old guys.
No, we're not doing that. I'm just saying that, I know the worth of my world building. I know the worth, or like Gabe's worth and world building is great. But the thing is, and for those who have been listening here, like we have joked about it before. But Alex here has been developing her world for quite literally years, like a lot longer than Gabe and I have, more than definitely. And when
I think it's been about a decade. This one, about a decade.
Yeah, like my thing, like Wuhan for me is only like 4 years old.
Yeah,
in its creation. Gabe's is like what, like 6?
I want to say 6, but
yes.
In honesty, Ildry has been a thing for like the past 3.
Yeah, stretching a decade, like there's got to be so much worth talking about. And you've even said it too, like you have universes. There's a multiverse.
I'm only going to talk about the one, because otherwise this would take like another 3 hours, and we don't have time for that. So the world I'm going to be talking about is called Katariana. It's like the main planet. It's not the only planet in the solar system with life. It's the main world that I've focused a lot of my world building and a lot of my stories on. So I'm actually going to change it up, and I'm going to start with the races, because the races are actually kind of where the world started for me, instead of the continents and stuff. So I have them kind of split into 5 groups. So the first group are celestial beings, as it were, and original versions of this world. They were like angels and demons. That's no longer what they are. They're called the Arun and the Drar. And the Arun are basically beings made of pure light. They consume stars. They can also condense themselves into a humanoid form, though they tend to look more like godlike entities. The Drar are similar. They're also like giant space beings that kind of rely on the Arun to live. After the Arun consume a star, they're like matter that's left over is what the Drar feed on. They kind of have like a symbiotic relationship. And so they're kind of separate from all the other races. All the other races are vaguely related to each other and can interbreed, if you will. But the Arun and the Drar are both asexual beings. They reproduce asexually. Group 2 is, I have it written as humans, ? They're the closest thing to humans in this world. And they're split into 3 groups. First group are I've been calling the basic race. They live all over the planet. They're not really confined to any regions. And they're called the Wechelen, or if I want to go English, elementals, and they're like basically people that have control over the 4 elements, except they're like split into 5 groups from there, one for each of the 4 elements, and then a group of people that don't have any ability with the elements at all. And then after that, you have the Kilbris, or the witches, which are basically Wacharen that figured out how to use non-elemental magic and figured that out. And then branching off from that, there's the Brisha, which are, well, I've been calling them psychics, sort of, and they have a similar like magical ability to the witches, but it's like different in a way. It's hard to explain the difference between them, but witches, the Kilbris, essentially can like are good with like physical magic, like things that control the real world, whereas the Brisha, the psychics, are more like mental magic, so more into like, you know, things that happen in your head, illusions and that kind of stuff. The third group are the beast walkers, as I've been calling them, otherwise known as shapeshifters.
Oh shit.
Shit, that's sweet.
Like 6 of them. So like, yeah, this is your basic like werewolf kind of, but not like, you know, controlled by the moon cycle werewolf, which would be really difficult considering this planet has 5 moons.
Oh my god. Okay.
So there's the Katath, which are like cat-like beings, and they can transform. They have like a humanoid form and a beast form, all of them. The Katath have a cat form. Then there's the Wavi, who are wolves. The Shichif, the foxes. The Zamern, who are like the mermaids of this world. They have like a human form and then like a sea form. It's not really like a fish or anything. It's just like its own thing. And there's the Gavuks, which are the centaurs. And then the Thikan, which are birds. Then the 4th group are the Fae. They include the Mirun, which are based on sirens. Then there's the Vamurth, otherwise known as the Pixies, which are like, these are the most colorful looking of the races. They have like different skin colors. They have like wings like a fairy. And then there's the Muvikuno, which are imps or sprites. They're the ones that look like the least humanoid. They're all quite short, have like quite bushy hair and stuff, and then again tend to have like not human skin colors. So yeah, that's the 4th group. And then the 5th group, I don't really have a name for. This is where the vampires come in. And there's 2 different kinds. There's the Varun and the Vabris. Varun are like the basic vampires. They're people who have been changed into Varun, either because they chose to or they were forced to against their will. Talked about this briefly last time, but the Varun have like slight variations, or they can be any race. To start off, they can be any race, like can be have been born any race and then turned into a Varun. So you can't be born Varun, basically. They tend to be stronger, faster, better at picking up like magic than other races. And then the Varbris are a specific kind of vampire. They have to do like ritual sacrifices in order to obtain it. And it makes them even stronger, faster, gives them like crazy magical abilities, makes them basically impossible to kill. It's also super illegal because, you know, ritual murder tends to be illegal in most places. Mine also has 4 continents. There's like the North continent, there's the South one, and then there's the two like big ones that are kind of like make up most of the world. And the world is split into 6 what I've been calling unions. Or like, you know, it's like, well, you know how like Europe and Asia are technically one continent, but then we separate them into Asia anyway. So like the 2 big continents are kind of like that, where they have 2 separate like unions on both of them. And then there's 6 continents in total. There's Oja, which is on the west continent on the south. There's Azat, which is the largest union. It's on the east continent on the north. We've got Drinak, which is the southernmost continent. There's Jadin, which is on the east continent in the south. There's Zarutika, which is the northernmost continent, and then there's Zarenia, which is on the west continent in the north. Each of the races has like a government who's like in charge of the race in general, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
My government system is like really complicated. So starting at the top, the Arun are their capital is in Zarutika, which is in the north. I can actually pull up what their city name is Zarunia. The Drar, their base of operations, is on the opposite side of the planet, down in, I remember my own continent names, down in Drinak. Their city is called Nodisht. I don't know what it looks like, unfortunately. And the Wetchelen actually have 5 different bases of operation. So the Wetchern, which are the people that don't have control over any elements, their city is called Noivo, and it's located in Azat, which is again on the east side in the north. The Neothalen, which are the earth elementals, they are in. This is so complicated. Why did I do this way? They're in Jadin. Their city's called Wechir, and they're in Jadin, which is again on the east in the south. The Folulen are the fire elementals. They're in Zarenia, and their city is called Dranok, and Zarenia is the west and the northwest union. That's probably a better way to phrase it. The Shikalen are also in Zarenia. Their city is called Hantris. And then the Zuxolen are the air elementals. Oh, the Shikalen are the water elementals. Did I mention that? I don't think I did. And then the Zuxolen are the air elementals, and they're in Drinak, and their city is called Lin. Kiobris, the witches, are also in Azat, I think. Their city is called Kano. The Brisha are in... like I said, this is a terrible way to do this. Brisha are in Oja, which is the southwest union, and their city is called Kita. Then we have the Beast Walkers, Katath. The cats are in a city called Katasin, which literally means cat city. By the way, very original name. And that's also in Azat. The Wavi are also in Azat. Their city is called Ulvi. The Shichif are in Zarenia. Their city is called Krishana. That's one of the ones whose name did not change when I changed all their names a couple years ago. There's a Mariner also in Zaratika. They're the mermaids. Their city is called Teme. The Gavuks are in Oja, and their city is called Farempa. The Thikan, again, the bird people, they're also in Azat. Azat is like the most populated. It's the biggest, so there's the most of them are there. And their city is called Slintasin, which is Blue City. It's on Blue Island in the Blue Bay. The Mirun are in Oja, and their city is called Miren. Vamurth are in Zarenia, and their city is called... where did you go? Ribarda. The Muvakuno are in Jadin, and their city is called Kailon. I can pronounce my own names. And then the Varun are in Aludra, which is also the capital of Zerenia. And then the Varbris have an island called Rutasin, Red City. That's also in Zerenia.
So it turns out Alex's world, Katariana, is a little bit more expansive than I last remembered it being. Certainly a little bit too expansive for just a 30-minute recap. So if you do want to check out everything else that she said, give the original episode a listen. It is the InkGuild Podcast episode 9, World Building. So yeah, tune into the next episode soon.